The cold was a living thing. It had teeth that bit into the marrow of her bones and a voice that whispered of endless winter. Alara had learned to live with it, to bargain with it for one more day, one more breath. For 5 years, this cave in the spine of the Frostfang Mountains had been her sanctuary and her prison. It smelled of damp stone, wet fur, and the lingering scent of the pine she burned for warmth. She ran a chapped hand over the sleeping form of her son, Kyle. His breath was a shallow rasp, too quick, too hot. A fever burned in his small body, a fire that the mountain's chill could not quench. Beside him, his twin sister, Lyra, slept soundly, her silver-white fur a mirror of their father's. A pang, sharp and familiar, pierced Alara's heart. Theron. Even his name was a ghost on her tongue, a memory of warmth in a world that had turned to ice. They had told her he was dead, slain in the Blackwater ambush, along with his entire honor guard. Lord Valerius, his face a mask of practiced grief, had delivered the news himself. He had looked at her, his eyes full of false pity, and declared her a bad omen. A weak, barren Luna who had brought ruin to their king. Barren. The lie was so bitter it still choked her. She had been carrying their pups then, a secret joy she had planned to share with Theron upon his return. Instead, his return never came. Valerius's decree of exile had followed. For her own safety, he'd claimed. To protect her from the wrath of a grieving pack. She knew better. He was erasing her. Erasing the last living piece of his king. So she had run. Fled into the unforgiving north, the secret of her children locked away in her womb. She had birthed them alone in this very cave, her only comfort the fading echo of a mate bond she believed was severed by death. Now, that bond was a dull, constant ache, a phantom limb that reminded her of all she had lost. Kale coughed, a dry, rattling sound that tore through the quiet. Alara's stomach clenched. The herbs she used to fight fevers were gone, buried under a week of relentless snow. The last of the dried meat was a pathetic strip she was saving for Lyra. Hunger was a constant companion, a hollow ache that gnawed at her insides. She was failing them. The thought was a cold dread that seeped deeper than the mountain's frost. She had survived the assassins Valerius had undoubtedly sent. She had survived the beasts of the wilderness and the soul-crushing loneliness, but she could not survive failing her children. She pulled the worn wolf pelt tighter around her shoulders and moved to the mouth of the cave. The wind howled, a symphony of despair, whipping snow in a blinding sheet. It was a wall of white. No escape, no hope. Her own wolf form was a distant memory. The trauma of the flight, the strain of a solitary birth, had locked it away. She was just Alara now, a woman, fragile and cold, with nothing left but a mother's desperate love. She pressed her forehead against the icy rock. "Please," she whispered to gods she no longer believed in, "don't take him. Don't take my son." A shadow fell over the entrance. It was massive, blocking what little gray light filtered through the storm. Alara froze, her heart seizing in her chest. A predator. A winter wolf, drawn by the scent of sickness, of weakness. Its sheer size was unnatural, larger than any she had ever seen. Its fur was the color of charcoal and ash, dusted with snow. She scrambled back, grabbing the sharpened stone she kept as a weapon. It was a pitiful defense, a child's toy against such a creature. Her body moved instinctively, placing herself between the beast and her sleeping pups. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the stone. She would die here, but she would not die cowering. The great wolf took a step into the cave, its head low. And then its eyes met hers. They were not the flat, hungry eyes of a wild animal. They were gold. A deep, molten gold that burned with a fierce intelligence, a familiar fire that ripped the air from her lungs. She knew those eyes. She had dreamt of them every night for 5 years. No, she breathed, the word a fragile puff of mist. It couldn't be. It was a fever dream, a hallucination brought on by starvation and grief, a ghost conjured by the storm. The wolf stared at her, then its gaze shifted to the two small forms huddled in the furs behind her. A low sound rumbled in its chest. Not a growl of aggression, it was something else. A sound of profound, earth-shattering shock. Slowly, with a control that spoke of immense power, the creature began to change. Bones cracked and reformed, fur receded into skin. The monstrous form of the wolf dissolved, shrinking into the shape of a man. He stood there, naked in the freezing air as if the cold was a minor inconvenience. He was broader, harder than she remembered. Scars, pale and silver, mapped the skin of his torso and arms. A particularly vicious one cut through his left eyebrow, giving his face a permanent, harsh severity. His black hair was longer, wilder, and his beard was unkempt. But it was him, Theron, the Alpha King, her mate. Alive. The sharpened stone slipped from her numb fingers and clattered to the floor. Her mind refused to process what her eyes were seeing. The man she had mourned, the man whose death had shattered her world, was standing 3 feet away from her. The dull ache of their bond flared to life, a sudden, agonizing supernova of feeling that buckled her knees. It wasn't a phantom limb, it was a live wire. He looked from her to the pups and back again, his golden eyes wide with a raw, unguarded emotion she couldn't decipher. It was a maelstrom of disbelief, fury, and something that looked terrifyingly like heartbreak. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a ragged whisper, a gravelly sound that seemed torn from the very depths of his soul. I found you. Alara's world tilted and went dark. She awoke to warmth. Not the fleeting, smoky warmth of a small fire, but a deep, penetrating heat that seemed to soak into her very bones. She was wrapped in thick, impossibly soft furs, lying on a mattress that felt like a cloud. A fire roared in a stone hearth nearby, casting a warm, flickering glow across a room paneled in dark, polished wood. Panic seized her. This wasn't her cave. Where were her children? She bolted upright, her head spinning. The furs pooled around her waist. She was wearing a simple linen shift, clean and soft against her skin. Easy. The voice came from a chair near the fire. Theron. He was sitting there, watching her. He was dressed now, in simple black trousers and a tunic, but the sheer force of his presence filled the room, making it feel small. Her eyes darted around the room, frantically searching. They are safe, he said, his voice quiet but absolute. He gestured with his head. In a smaller bed tucked into an alcove, she saw them. Lyra and Kyle, sleeping peacefully, nestled under a mountain of pelts. The frantic rhythm of her heart began to slow. She looked back at him, her mind a whirlwind of questions and fear. How? She whispered, her throat raw. They said you were dead. A muscle jumped in his jaw. The look in his golden eyes was bleak, a winter landscape. The reports were a lie, a betrayal. He didn't elaborate. The words hung in the air, heavy and cold. He rose from the chair and walked to the foot of her bed. He moved with a predator's grace, silent and deliberate. He was a king, every inch of him, from the set of his broad shoulders to the unyielding authority in his gaze. But there was a deep weariness in him, a haunting she had never seen before. 5 years, Alara, he said, his voice low and strained. I searched 5 kingdoms for any trace of your assassins. I tore apart the Blackwater Valley looking for your remains. They told me you were gone, that my entire family was wiped out in a single day. The pain in his voice was so raw it was a physical blow. He had thought she was dead. He had been mourning her. Valerius, she began, is my most trusted advisor. Theron finished, his tone clipped. The one who pulled me from the wreckage of the ambush. The one who told me the assassins had gotten to you first. The lie was intricate, poisonous. Valerius had played them both, isolating them with their shared, manufactured grief. A cold fury, unfamiliar and potent, began to smolder in Alara's chest. Theron's gaze drifted to the pups. They are mine. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, of absolute certainty. He could feel it, just as she could. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. He looked back at her, and for the first time she saw the crack in his iron control. A flicker of vulnerability, of profound, aching loss. Why did you run? Why didn't you come to me? The question was a knife in her heart. Come to you? She asked, her voice trembling with a sorrow that was 5 years deep. I thought you were a ghost. I ran to save them. Valerius exiled me. He said the pack would tear me apart in their grief. He said I was barren. Understanding dawned in Theron's eyes, followed by a wave of cold, murderous rage. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. He will pay for that lie with his life. He seemed to rein himself in, the fury receding back beneath his controlled exterior. He looked at her, at the thinness of her face, the haunted look in her eyes. You will be safe here. This is a royal lodge, protected by wards. No one knows of its existence but me. You and the children will be cared for. It was a proclamation, not a comfort. He was establishing the new reality. He was taking control. This changes nothing, he said, his voice hardening, becoming formal. A wall slammed down between them, cold and impenetrable. They are my heirs. They must be protected. You, as their mother, will be afforded the same protection. That is all. The words were a slap. That is all. After 5 years of believing him dead, after raising their children alone in the frozen dark, that was all. He was her mate, the other half of her soul, and he was speaking to her as if she were a political arrangement, a duty to be managed. The hope that had flared in her chest moments before turned to ash. She had found him again, only to lose him in a different way. He was a king, hardened by war and betrayal. The gentle, laughing male she had loved was gone, buried under scars and a crown of ice. And she was just the woman who carried his heirs, a vessel, a necessity. The old feeling, the one Valerius had branded her with, crept back in. Worthless. I understand, Your Majesty, she whispered, the title feeling foreign and sharp on her tongue. He flinched, a barely perceptible tightening of his shoulders. He turned and walked back to the fire, his back to her. The audience was over. The days that followed were a strange sort of limbo. Alara was no longer cold or hungry. The lodge was a fortress of warmth and comfort. Servants, silent and discreet, appeared with food, with fresh clothes, with anything she might need, and then vanished just as quickly. They were Theron's personal guard, loyal only to him, their faces impassive masks. Her children thrived. Kale's fever broke the first night, aided by a potent broth a servant brought. Within days, the color returned to his cheeks. He and Lyra explored the lodge with the boundless curiosity of pups, their laughter echoing in halls that had likely been silent for years. Theron was a constant, distant presence. He spent hours with the children. He didn't play with them, not in the way a father should. Instead, he would simply watch them, his expression unreadable. Or he would sit with Kale, who was still weak, and tell him stories of the great wolves of the past, his deep voice a mesmerizing rumble. Alara would watch from a doorway, her heart a tangled knot of longing and pain. She saw the father in him, buried deep beneath the king. He rarely spoke to her directly. He would ask after her health, if she required anything, his tone always polite, always formal. He never called her by her name again. He never touched her. The bond between them hummed with a constant, agonizing tension, a live wire they both refused to acknowledge. One evening, she found him in the great hall, standing before a massive map of the 5 kingdoms that was carved into the wall. He was tracing a path through the Frostfang Mountains with one finger. "You were looking for me," she said, her voice quiet. He didn't turn. "I was looking for answers," he corrected her coldly. "I was hunting the men I believed killed you." "For 5 years? I would have hunted them for 500. The intensity in his voice was frightening. "Every time a lead went cold, every time I found another dead end, I would come north. Back to the mountains. I didn't know why. It felt closer." He was talking about the bond. He had felt her, a faint pull he couldn't identify, and it had drawn him back here again and again. "Theron," she said, taking a step closer. "What happened? The real story." He finally turned to face her. The firelight carved harsh shadows on his face, making the scars stand out. "We were betrayed. Someone leaked our route through the Blackwater Pass. It was a slaughter. They were waiting for us. My guard. They died buying me time to shift, to fight my way out." His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, which was somehow more chilling than rage. "When I came to, Valerius was there. He told me he'd arrived with reinforcements but was too late. He told me the assassins had split their forces, that the other group had gone for you." He looked at her, his golden eyes burning into hers. "He brought me your cloak, torn and bloodied. He said they found it by the river." Alara's breath hitched. She remembered. An assassin had cornered her by the river on the day she fled. She'd torn her cloak on a branch getting away, leaving it behind. Valerius hadn't just lied. He had used the truth to build his monstrous deception. "He built my new world on a foundation of your bones," Theron said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "He helped me hunt your killers, always one step behind. He advised me, guided my grief, my rage. He made himself indispensable. He has been ruling at my side while the real traitor looked back at me from my own counsel." The sheer scale of the betrayal was staggering. Valerius hadn't just wanted power. He had wanted to break his king, to hollow him out from the inside until nothing was left but a puppet. That night, the nightmares came back. Not of the cold or the hunger, but of the flight. The glint of steel in the moonlight, the snarling faces of the assassins, the terror of being hunted. She woke with a strangled cry, her body drenched in a cold sweat. The door to her chamber creaked open. Theron stood in the doorway, a silhouette against the dim light of the hall. He was there instantly, as if he had been waiting. "A dream," she managed to say, her voice shaking. He didn't move from the doorway. He just stood there watching her, his presence a silent, solid weight in the room. He didn't offer comfort, no soft words or gentle touch. But he stayed. He stayed until her breathing evened out, until the trembling subsided, until she finally drifted back into an uneasy sleep. It was the most intimate thing he had done since he'd found her. The boundary between them was eroding, not with a flood, but with a slow, steady trickle of shared moments. He started joining them for meals, sitting at the head of the long table, the children between them like a bridge and a barrier. He would watch as she cut their meat, as she wiped Lyra's chin. And she would watch him, seeing the way his eyes would soften when Cale told him a rambling story about a squirrel he'd seen. One afternoon, Lyra, bold and fearless like her father, toddled over to him while he was studying his maps. She held up a small, smooth river stone. "For you," she declared. Theron froze. He stared at the stone in her small hand as if it were a venomous snake. For a long moment, he did nothing. Alara held her breath. Then, slowly, he reached out and took the stone. His large, calloused fingers dwarfed hers. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick. He closed his hand around the stone and didn't let it go. Later, when he thought she wasn't looking, she saw him slip the small gray stone into his pocket. The king was beginning to crack, and the father was looking through. Hope, a fragile, dangerous thing, began to bloom in the barren landscape of her heart. Maybe he wasn't lost to her. Maybe, under all that ice, her Theron was still there. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a scout, one of Theron's elite guard, who arrived half dead and bleeding, his wolf form barely holding together. He collapsed in the great hall, gasping out a report. "They know," the wolf panted, his words slurring. "Lord Valerius. His patrols are sweeping the north. He's looking for a woman and 2 children, silver-furred pups." Theron went still. The air in the room crackled with his silent, contained fury. He had been so careful, but a secret this large could not be kept forever. A shepherd, a trapper. Someone must have seen them and sold the information. "He knows you're alive," Theron said to her, his voice grim. The unspoken words hung between them, "and he is coming to finish the job." The lodge, once a sanctuary, now felt like a trap. Every gust of wind sounded like an approaching army. Every shadow seemed to hold an assassin. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was heavy with dread. Theron moved with a new urgency. He doubled the patrols, spent hours with his captain of the guard, their voices low and tense as they pored over maps. The distant king was gone, replaced by the Alpha King at war. He came to her that night, finding her staring into the fire, her arms wrapped around herself. The children were asleep, blissfully unaware of the danger closing in on them. "He will not have them," Theron stated. It was a vow. "I will burn the world to ash before I let him touch any of you." "This is my fault," she whispered. "If I had been stronger, faster." "No." He cut her off, his voice sharp. He finally crossed the space between them, stopping just before her. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from him. "The fault lies with the traitor. And with me. I was blind. I let my grief be forged into a weapon he used against my own kingdom." He looked down at her, his golden eyes filled with a storm of regret and rage. "He took everything from me, Alara. My family, my mate, my heirs. He left me a ghost on a throne, ruling a kingdom of memories. When I found you, it was like the sun rising for the first time in 5 years. Do you understand? I was living in darkness. You are the light." His confession shattered the last of her defenses. He wasn't just protecting his heirs. He was protecting his hope. He was protecting her. "Theron," she breathed, her hand instinctively reaching for his arm. The moment her fingers touched him, a jolt, hot and electric, shot through them both. It was the bond, raw and unfiltered, waking from its long slumber. His control snapped. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch surprisingly gentle for a man so hard. He searched her eyes, a desperate, hungry look on his face. "I thought I would never see you again," he rasped. Every day was a new kind of hell. And then he kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was 5 years of grief and loneliness and rage poured into one desperate, consuming act. It was the claiming of a king, the reunion of a mate. She clung to him, meeting his ferocity with her own, pouring all her own pain and loss and desperate love into her response. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "Mine," he growled, the word a possessive, primal declaration. "Yours," she whispered back, the word a surrender and a victory all at once. The fragile peace of their reunion was shattered 2 days later. The attack came at dawn. A volley of arrows, silent and deadly, took out the sentries on the wall before they could raise an alarm. Ilara was woken by the sound of splintering wood as the lodge's main doors were smashed in by a battering ram. Theron was already moving. He burst into her room, a massive broadsword in one hand, his eyes glowing with feral golden light. "They're here," he said, his voice a low growl. He scooped up a drowsy Kale and Lyra, wrapping them in a thick fur cloak. "Stay with them. Bar the door. Do not open it for anyone but me." He pressed a short, wicked-looking dagger into her hand. "Protect our children." He kissed her. A hard, swift kiss that tasted of love and impending violence. And then he was gone, his roar of fury echoing through the lodge as he met the first wave of attackers. Ilara shoved a heavy chest against the door and huddled in the corner with the pups, who were now wide awake and terrified. She could hear the sounds of battle outside, the clash of steel, the snarls of shifting wolves, the screams of the dying. Through the bond, she could feel Theron's rage, his pain, his unwavering determination. He was a whirlwind of death, a king defending his family. She held the dagger, its weight cold and unfamiliar in her hand. This was it. The nightmare she had been running from for 5 years had finally caught her. The sounds of fighting grew closer. A heavy thud slammed against their door, making the wood groan. Then another. They were trying to break it down. Lyra began to cry, burying her face in Ilara's side. Kale, however, stared at the door, his small body trembling, but his eyes held a flicker of his father's fire. A new voice cut through the chaos, loud and imperious. "He's in here. The Alpha King has holed himself up with the female. Bring him down." Valerius. A terrible crash echoed from the main hall, followed by Theron's agonized roar of pain. Ilara felt it through the bond, a searing, white-hot agony in her own shoulder. An arrow. He'd been hit. Her blood ran cold. She could feel his strength faltering, the poison on the arrow. Silver-laced, she knew instinctively, working its way into his system. He was fighting on, but he was wounded. He was in danger. The pounding on their door stopped. A moment of terrifying silence, then a single, sharp crack. The bar holding the door shattered. The door swung inward. Lord Valerius stood there, a cruel, triumphant smile on his face. 2 of his personal guards flanked him. He was dressed in ornate black armor, a sword dripping with fresh blood in his hand. "Well, well," he said, his eyes landing on Ilara and the children, the ghost and her litter. "I must admit, I'm impressed you survived the North. You are more resourceful than I gave you credit for." Ilara stood, pushing the pups behind her, raising the dagger. It looked like a toothpick against his broadsword. Valerius laughed. "Put that down, little Omega. You were never a fighter. Always so weak, so fragile. It's a wonder Theron ever chose you." He took a step into the room. "He's dying, you know." My best archer placed a silver-tipped arrow right in his shoulder. Even an Alpha King can't fight that poison for long. Soon, the throne will be empty. She could feel it. Theron's life force was fading, the vibrant energy she felt through the bond flickering like a dying candle. Despair, cold and absolute, washed over her. She was going to lose him again, this time for good. "But I am not an unmerciful man," Valerius continued, his smile turning oily. "The kingdom will need heirs, his heirs. Give me the pups. I will raise them. They will be my puppets, a symbol of the beloved king they will never remember. And you." He looked her up and down, a lecherous glint in his eye. "I might even find a use for you." Rage, so pure and potent it burned away her fear, erupted in her chest. She would rather die. They would all die, before she let this monster lay a hand on her children. "Never," she snarled, the sound more wolf than woman. Valerius sighed dramatically. "A pity." He nodded to his guards. "Kill her. Be careful with the children." The guards advanced. Ilara braced herself, ready to sell her life as dearly as possible. But then, Valerius, impatient, decided to end it himself. He lunged forward, not at her, but at Lyra, reaching to grab her by the arm. Time seemed to slow down. Ilara saw his gloved hand reaching for her daughter. She saw the fear in Lyra's wide eyes. She felt the last of Theron's strength guttering out through the bond. And something inside her broke. It was not a snap. It was a shattering, like a dam of ice built over a volcano finally giving way to the pressure beneath. All the fear, the grief, the rage, the ferocious, untamed love she had for her mate and her children ignited. A wave of power, brilliant and golden, erupted from her. It was not fire. It was warmth. It was life. The air in the room shimmered. The frost on the window panes melted in an instant. The stone floor beneath her feet felt warm. Valerius and his men stumbled back, shielding their eyes from the sudden blinding light that radiated from her. "What is this sorcery?" Valerius hissed. Ilara didn't answer. Her mind was a maelstrom of pure, focused intent. Save him. The thought was a prayer, a command, a roar. She turned from Valerius, ignoring him completely, and ran from the room. She found Theron slumped against a pillar in the great hall, the black feathered shaft of an arrow protruding from his shoulder. His skin was pale, his breathing shallow. His golden eyes were dimming, turning gray. He was dying. "No," she whispered, dropping to her knees beside him. "I did not find you again just to lose you." She placed her hands on his chest, over his heart. The golden light poured from her palms into his body. It was a torrent of pure life energy, a sunbeam burning away the winter's poison. The silver arrowhead, buried deep in his flesh, sizzled and dissolved into harmless dust. The wound stitched itself closed, leaving behind unmarked skin. Color flooded back into his face. He took a deep, shuddering breath, and his eyes flew open. The gold was back, brighter and more powerful than ever, amplified by her own magic. He looked from her glowing hands to her face, his expression one of pure awe. "I knew it," he breathed. "I always felt it in you. A hidden sun." Behind them, Valerius stared, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. Impossible. Ilara rose, helping Theron to his feet. They stood together, his strength returning with every passing second, her light still pulsing around her. She turned to face the traitor, and for the first time in her life, she felt no fear. Only a cold, calm certainty. "You took my home," she said, her voice ringing with a power she had never known she possessed. "You took my mate. You tried to take my children. You will take nothing else." She raised a hand. She didn't know what she was doing, only that the world seemed to be listening to her. She focused on the life that lay dormant, even here, in the stone and wood of the lodge. With a great groan, the ancient wooden beams of the ceiling began to twist and sprout green leaves. Thick, thorny vines erupted from the floorboards, snaking around the legs of Valerius and his men, holding them fast. The life she commanded was not gentle. It was a cage, strong as iron, forged from the very foundations of the building. Valerius struggled, hacking at the vines with his sword, but for every one he cut, 2 more grew in its place, thicker and stronger than before. He was trapped. Theron stepped forward, his recovered strength rolling off him in waves. He picked up his broadsword and leveled it at the imprisoned Valerius's throat. "Treason is not a crime I forgive," the Alpha King growled, his voice deep as thunder. The battle was over. The remaining loyal guards quickly subdued Valerius's men. The traitor himself was bound in chains, the living vines receding back into the wood, their purpose served. In the sudden, ringing silence, Theron turned to Ilara. The golden aura around her slowly faded, but the power still hummed beneath her skin. He didn't look at her like she was a weapon or a surprise. He looked at her as if he was seeing something he had always known was there, finally brought into the light. He pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest. He buried his face in her hair, holding her as if he would never let go. I searched every mountain, every forgotten valley, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Not for a queen, for you, only for you, Alara. Tears streamed down her face, tears of relief, of joy. The last of the worthlessness, the brand of the Omega, the exile, washed away. She was not a failure, she was a survivor. She was a mother, she was a queen. I love you, he said, the words she had longed to hear, a sacred vow spoken in the ruin of their temporary home. Knowing you were gone was a wound that never healed. Seeing you alive, it's like being reborn. She pulled back just enough to look at him. I love you, Theron. I never stopped. Kale and Lyra, who had watched the entire thing with wide, wondering eyes, ran to them. Theron swept them both up in his free arm, holding his entire family together for the first time. He was no longer a ghost king, and she was no longer a woman in hiding. They were whole. 6 months later, the Silverwood throne room was filled to bursting. Light streamed through the high-arched windows, illuminating the vibrant tapestries that now depicted a great black wolf and a she-wolf of pure, golden light, their 2 pups playing at their feet. The story of their survival, of Valerius's betrayal, and of the Queen's hidden power was known throughout the 5 kingdoms. Alara stood beside Theron, not behind him. She wore gowns of deep forest green, her silver hair braided with living flowers that bloomed and faded with her mood. She was no longer just the king's mate. She was the life queen, a symbol of hope and renewal for a kingdom that had been scarred by a hidden war. Valerius was in the deepest dungeon, stripped of his title and his lands, left to rot with the knowledge of his failure. His followers had been dealt with, and the kingdom was at peace, a true peace, not the stagnant quiet of a grieving king. Later that day, they stood in the royal gardens. Her power had transformed the once formal space into a lush, wild paradise. Kale and Lyra, now strong and confident, chased glowing butterflies that Alara had spun from motes of sunlight. They were not pups anymore. They were a prince and princess, secure in their parents' love. Theron came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. The haunted look was gone from his eyes, replaced by a deep, steady warmth. He was still a king, still powerful, but the ice around his heart had melted for good. Ambassadors from the Sunstone Desert arrived this morning, he murmured into her hair. Their lands are dying. They've come to ask for an audience. With you. She smiled, leaning back against the solid wall of his chest. She was not afraid. She was not hiding. She had found her voice, her power, her place. Then let them come, she said. They watched their children play in the golden afternoon light, a family reforged in ice and fire, their love the foundation of a new world. Their greatest battle was over, but their story, the story of the Alpha King and his hidden queen, was just beginning.